Actual Fluency Podcast, episode 25, featuring interpreter and translator Robert Bigler. Are you thinking about starting your own language learning website? Then check out HostGator. Use the coupon code ActualFluency to get you your first month for just 1 cent. Get started by going to actualfluency.com/HostGator. Do you like audiobooks? Well, then Audible is for you. If you go to actualfluency.com/book, you can choose a free audiobook from a selection of 150,000 titles.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. As always, I'm Chris Broholm, and you can find more information about me, language learning, and what I'm up to. I'm currently studying Russian and Esperanto. You can find all that information on the blog actualfluency.com. Today is a very special episode. It features an Austrian polyglot called Robert Bigler, and I was fortunate enough to meet Robert at the Polyglot Berlin gathering, and I got to talk to him, and after talking a bit with him, I knew I had to get him on the show. And that's when I actually remembered that the very first guest that I had written down in my little Google Docs of potential people to invite onto the show was in fact Robert Bigler, because I had already a few people in mind I wanted when I started the show, but I also asked one of my good friends, Judith Mayer, about who I should invite, and she suggested Robert as one of the first, because he's been working with translation and interpretation for 18 plus years, probably longer, but the importance was that not only is he a very good person to talk to about learning languages, he's also a very good person to talk to in terms of a career choice. And one of the popular talks at Polyglot Berlin was in fact by Ellen Jovin about job opportunities for polyglots. So I know for a fact that there's a lot of you guys sitting out there who speak a lot of languages who might be interested in getting into either translation or interpretation. And that's basically why I invited Robert on to talk to us about translation, interpretation, but also, language learning in general, because you don't get to be a translator or an interpreter in 7 different languages by just, sleeping all day. So Robert has a lot of inspirational tips and tricks on how he learned this many languages. And other than that, I just want to say thank you for listening, as per usual. And if you have any questions or comments, you can always send me a message via the website in the top bar. And one last thing, if you are using iTunes to listen to this, I would really appreciate it if you took a second to leave a review, because that really helps the show out. And I read all the reviews and I love it when I see them. So if you wouldn't mind, also if you're using other places to listen to this, like Stitcher, any kind of review that can kind of help me get out to more language learners is really great. Oh, and by the way, this is really exciting. The show had reached over 10,000 downloads. So thank you guys. You guys are awesome, and I'm happy to be here every week providing inspirational and inspirational language learning content and interviews with amazing language learners. And as long as you guys want to hear it, I'll be here doing it. So thank you so much, guys. And here's my interview with Robert Bigler. Have to warn you a little bit. We do go straight into it because we were sitting in front of each other in Berlin. So I don't do my usual call it radio introduction, but I hope you enjoy anyway. How did you get started? You had German, English, and probably when you started school.
Yeah, as I said before, since I'm Austrian, my native language is Austrian-German. So it is German. Now it's German, I'm just kidding. So we have our own variant, of course, but it is German. And I started out with English as my first foreign language in school, and then I had to choose between French and Italian. Officially, I was given a choice, but then it was our school that decided that my class had to take Italian and the other classes had to take French.
Oh, really?
But I was very happy with that decision anyway, because I really loved Italian right from the beginning. I had an amazing Italian teacher which is not always a given either if you talk about language teachers. Though I think sometimes people, like blame the teachers too often because you have to do the work, right? So if at all, bad teachers have always motivated me to do much more work at home, and that.
So a bad teacher is a good teacher for you, actually.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, that's what made me progress or make more progress. So, after I attended some sort of a commercial high school, and I didn't want to study economics, so I decided to go to university and try and study English and Italian. And that's what I did, and I had to change the faculty because the first faculty I was at was only training teachers. I only learned about that later on because at that time, no internet, whatever, those were the dark ages, so to speak. So it was not that easy to get all that information beforehand. And then I went to an institute that actually trains interpreters and translators, and that was a great choice, and I really loved it right from the beginning. And before I finished my studies in Italian and English, I added Spanish and French.
Wow.
I did not graduate in all these 4 languages. I graduated in the first 2, but you don't have to because the profession of interpreters and translators is not a regulated one, which means that you don't need an official diploma to be allowed or to be able to work as an interpreter.
So you went to the school was basically built for
exactly.
For that. Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you must have known that when you joined that one, though.
Yes, yes. That was a very conscious decision.
Okay, great. So you kind of actually by then knew that was what you were interested in.
Well, the thing is, I never expected to actually work as an interpreter. I always thought that I would be working in an international company. I never thought that this was the kind of work that I would enjoy doing. The thing was that this was the only kind of university that actually gave you the opportunity to speak the language, to read the language. If you go to other places, they teach you about the language in your native tongue. So the first university I went to, even though I had registered, enrolled for Italian and English, most of the classes were in German about Italian and English.
That's awful.
Yeah, it's awful. And that's not what I wanted. And at that other institute for interpreters and translators, you would always almost exclusively speak in your target language. You would have a lot of native speakers, and that's what I was interested in.
Yeah, and of course you're getting a kind of the why. You're getting that very quickly. Well, why am I studying this? Well, because I want to translate or interpret.
Well, basically it was about people, as we said before. What really drives me in my passion for languages are people.
Yeah.
It's, of course, I'm interested in the culture, but culture is very closely connected with people, right?
Yeah.
And I like traveling because I like to see different places, different landscapes, whatever. But again, at the end of the day, it's the people that motivate me to start studying a language and that help me keep studying, right?
Right. So you went through all these languages in the beginning, and you what was your first job? Was that in translation? Or?
Yes. Well, I finished my studies, and my first job was my final examination. So I got paid for that, as a matter of fact, because one of my teachers, she had organized a conference and she needed some interpreters for that. And she said, "Robert, why aren't you joining our team? This will be your final exam, and at the same time you get paid for it if you do a fine job." So,
how much motivation do you need?
That was great. That was really great. And I'm still working with that professor. She now is a colleague and a dear friend, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And she was very supportive right from the beginning. So after that, however, I went to another department of our university, a computer department, and they needed somebody who translated their manuals, from English, whatever. I think it was English and French into German. That's what I did for a year because it was just a temporary job. Then I went to Latin America for about 6 months. I worked with some sort of institution that trains social workers, and I was working with handicapped people and street children. And after that, I went back to Austria. I was unemployed for about 2 months. Then I worked in a translation agency for about 3 months, and then I went freelance. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
And you obviously enjoy that since you've been
very
doing it for so
much,
long.
Very much. This was like one of the best decisions that I've ever made in my life, and I don't regret it.
Right. And you've obviously traveled across the world. And
I have traveled a lot. I used to travel much more than I'm traveling now, because I used to do I'm both. I'm an interpreter and a translator. Right. So that's another specific thing, because most people either work only as a translator or as an interpreter. I do both, and I've been enjoying both, but I no longer do as many conference days as I used to in the past. Sorry. And I now prefer working from home sometimes, but I traveled a lot to North America, to Northern Africa, most of the European countries, to Asia, to Australia. So yeah, I've been to many places.
Right. And when we say interpreter and translator, most people know the difference, of course, but in terms of skills for both, are they different? Or, I mean, of course, they lean on each other quite well. But what would be the difference between a good translator and a good interpreter?
Well, first of all, if you want to go into the business of interpreting, I think you shouldn't be a very shy person.
Right.
You should be able to work under a lot of stress. I mean, translating can be very stressful as well, but it's a different kind of stress, because even if you have a tight schedule and a tight deadline, you still have more time to prepare for the job, or you have the opportunity to take out part of that pressure by just, organizing your day. You can't do that in a booth. If there's a presentation, a very difficult one for 45 minutes, these 45 minutes are the time where you have to be super focused on that presentation, and that is stressful. Some people, I was just like the other day, I was talking to a young guy here, and he's very, very good in all the languages that I spoke to him to, and he actually studied translating and interpreting as well. But he said that he just...
I think I met him. I don't remember his name though, but I think it sounds like somebody I've met as well,
Yeah, I think he's from the Ukraine, but I'm not sure. He now lives in Germany, I think, but I'm not totally sure. And but he said that it was just not his type of job. I mean, he couldn't imagine doing that for an extended period of time.
Right.
I do think that let's face it, even though you have to be precise and clear on what you say when you do work as an interpreter, as a simultaneous interpreter, you will not be as precise, as clear, as specific as someone who does a written translation.
Right.
So I think that you have to be very, very good with languages in both cases, but maybe even more precise when you work as a translator.
Right. And you need some more creativity. Sorry. Maybe you need some more creativity as an interpreter, because you need to think quickly on your feet.
Yeah, you have to more creative in the sense of being able to get yourself out of a difficult situation very quickly.
Right.
And you have to be in command of your voice. You have to make sure that even though you are about to get into trouble, because you yourself know that in about 10 seconds you will either come up with a term that fits the context, or you will go down or whatever. So you feel that pressure, you feel that anxiety, but you got to make sure that the people listening to you don't.
Of course. Mm-hmm. So have you had any of these kind of
yes.
Do you have any particularly bad ones you can share?
Well, there were a few bad ones, I think. I mean, things have changed in a way, because nowadays we almost all have internet connection in our booth. We have our notebooks, our laptops. So I have about, 20, 25 different electronic dictionaries on that notebook. Of course, it's not that you can look up every single word, because then you won't be able to listen to the speaker and interpret at the same time. But it's still some sort of a safety net that takes out some of the really nasty kind of pressure that you can have. And the problem is, especially if you work from English into German or whatever, that about nowadays, at least in Austria and other countries that I've worked in so far, most of the presentations that are given in English are not given by native speakers of English. And the level of proficiency varies very much. And I'm not trying to put down anybody, because I make mistakes myself, but sometimes you have people who are sent by their bosses or, head of departments to a conference they haven't spoken English for 15 years. They had the text either translated by somebody else or tried to translate it themselves. And sometimes it's even hard to recognize the language. Wow. And that's really difficult.
That sounds like an uphill battle.
So we had like, especially with names, yeah, I mean, there are many cases where I thought, gosh, sure, that was close, or that was even terrible. So I waited at least 10 minutes before I left my booth so that nobody would see me.
But you don't always get the text, do you?
No, that is the theory. I mean, you should be given the text like next week, right? I'm going to EU conference. Just before we talked about an hour ago, I checked my email again because they promised they would send us the documents.
Yeah.
And nothing. They said, okay, unfortunately, we don't have anything, but you can look at our website and we have a list of the speakers. So what I do is that I will be Googling speakers to make sure that I know what have they been talking about lately. And I know the general theme. And so no, that's sometimes a problem. If it's, to be honest, if it's like common standard EU stuff, it's not that much.
You're used to it.
Yeah,
You're used to
exactly.
lingo
And the topic next week isn't going to be that specific. If it's a very technical conference, I either deny or I refuse that job assignment or job offer if I don't get any papers beforehand. Or I'll just try to make sure that there are at least a couple of really, really good technicians in our team so that I can ask them in need if I'm in need of help.
Yeah, it's a whole. I mean, that's why I find you very interesting to talk to, because there's not that many interpreters, at least not in the polyglot community, oddly enough, for some reason. But at least they're not. Maybe they're not vocal of that. But anyway, it's something that a lot of people who might be watching this might be thinking about going into as a career, translating and interpreting, or one of the two. So when you get this, let's say you got the paper in due time, what would be the steps that would you go over it as a translation job and just go through it, or would you just kind of do a note version and see, okay, that word and that phrase, or like would you go through it systematically, or would you only focus on the kind of problem points when you were preparing for an
conference?
Yeah, for instance.
No, what I do, but everybody does it differently.
Of course.
Okay. Well, at first, when I started out, of course, I needed much more time to prepare. I needed to make sure that I know all the technical terms. But, as time goes by, you realize that maybe there are about 50 or 100 specific terms and the rest is just normal lingo. It's just like everyday language. And you have to be very, very, confident when it comes to these everyday expressions. If that is something that causes you problems, then you have to do something about it.
Right.
What I do is that if I really have a presentation, and if I have enough time, sometimes you just don't have enough time to do that.
Right.
And you have to prepare in between because you work for about 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then it's your colleague, taking over. And in between, you have that time that you can also use to prepare, right? And you will maybe have learned a few things from the earlier presentations, okay?
Right.
So because you keep listening to them and you try to understand what they're trying to convey as a message. I never do a full translation, never ever. I don't like that. I don't do any translations from the paper itself, as we call it. It's like some people just read it out and then translate it. I don't do that. I just want to get the gist of what he or she's talking about, and if there are specific terms, I don't know. I go through it very, very quickly.
Right.
Like, scanning it for any word expression that might cause a problem.
That seems unusual.
Yeah, exactly. That I look up in the dictionary or on the internet.
Right.
And if I still have time, then I go through the text just to understand the flow, to the red thread that he or she is using. Other than that, I just try to relax and take it from there.
Yeah, of course. And of course there's a difference also between doing that kind of conference interpreting, and let's say you were in Russia and you were on a TV show and they had American guests. That's one example I've seen.
Yeah.
And it was Mila Kunis, I think they had on, and there was just this voice.
Yeah.
It's really obnoxious, but
we do that sometimes as well. I don't like it at all. but sometimes that's the only way.
That must be incredibly difficult because it's on the fly. The person who's speaking doesn't even know what he or she's going to say.
Yeah.
So how is the translator going to immediately pick it up?
Yeah, but that happens a lot with press conferences.
Right. It's the same concept.
Yeah, and most of the press conferences are done in consecutive style, however, which means that the person speaks first 3-4 sentences, and then you translate that or interpret that. And I definitely prefer simultaneous interpreting. Yeah, but it's true, especially last year, for example, I went to an international conference on mountaineering in Italy, and they had some discussions there, panel discussions, and they had different people, like, I don't know, some people might know Reinhold Messner, and, he's quite famous, at least in Europe, I guess. And there were some other extreme like climbers, and these people are very, let's say, first of all, they're very outspoken. Sometimes they don't always use standard language, use their own dialect. So I was lucky enough to be Austrian there, because I was feeling bad for some of my French and Spanish colleagues, because some of the Austrians, they were speaking in their local dialect, and that was, I could understand them, but sometimes, the host had to ask them to speak standard German again, because the other interpreters wouldn't understand what they said. So that can be tough too.
Yeah, and what really got me was that they asked Mila Kunis about interpreting, and she said that the simultaneous interpretation of these press conferences and like a live setting is not a translation, it's more of an interpretation.
Yeah.
Obviously that's where the name comes from. And what do you think are the biggest pitfalls you can do as an interpreter when you are making your own interpretation?
The thing is, when you use the term interpretation, it's not something that refers to the content. That is very important. So the content always has to stay the same. What you do is, and that's my only explanation for why that works, simultaneous interpreting, because if you really try to translate that consciously, you just wouldn't have enough time to do that. What I do is that I try to get a feeling for the entire environment situation, okay? And I sort of try to get into the mindset of that person.
Right.
And then I try to say the things in the target language. Somehow it's like if somebody, I don't know, made me put on an Italian, sweater or whatever, and then I turn into someone who is Italian, and I try to say things the Italian ways to speak, but the message has to be the same.
Right.
And
which is the difficulty, I suppose.
Exactly. That's it. But that's the only way it works, because it's just like now I'm speaking in English, but of course I'm not thinking of German words beforehand. I could never do that. Right. So it's like sort of my if you want, my English speaking identity that is working right now. And it's the same as an interpreter. And the thing is that sometimes especially when I'm really tired, and if you ask me what I said, afterwards, after the conference is finished, I couldn't tell you a thing. Right. It's just it's going through me, right? It's some sort of a medium, I guess.
Fantastic. Well, I'd really love to hear your thoughts about general language learning as well, but I gotta ask you if you're interested in Tokipona.
I have to say I heard about it for the first time 2 days ago. I definitely want to see that presentation.
Well, then we must...
Okay, because it's right now?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll watch it. I'll watch it on YouTube. It's that 120 words language or whatever, made of 120 words.
Oh, you should. We could go and watch.
That's okay. That's okay. Don't worry.
That's a good thing they're recording it, because also with the ones being at the same time, it's hard. Fantastic. So I want to change the subject to your language learning, but after school, because I'm sure a lot of people have familiarity with learning languages in school and university. But how did you go about learning languages on your own way after, I suppose? You must have had a working...
Well, the thing is that when I first started out adding languages to the ones that I learned in the school system, as I said, that was many, many years ago, before internet and even before the times of satellite TV. And what I did is that I just bought an ordinary common language course, one that I liked. And I think the only thing you have to do is, you have to choose a language that you're really interested in. What I normally try to do is that I try to get, nowadays it's quite easy to get a dialogue-based basic language course that helps me understand the basic grammar. I think grammar is very important. I like grammar, but I don't like studying it by heart. I never study any rules by heart. I cannot give you any explanations for why things are right when I say them.
So hopefully they're correct.
Exactly. And I try to speak more or less from the first day speaking in the sense of maybe just repeating sentences that I hear. I always try to use audio material. Nowadays, that's quite easy.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
And then I try to use authentic material as soon as possible.
Right.
If the writing system is a different one, like with Japanese and Chinese, then it takes a little bit more time before you can actually work with authentic material. But even if I understand, just like with Chinese and Japanese when I started out, even if I would only understand like 1, 2, 3 characters in half a page, to me that was motivation enough to continue.
Right.
So I think one danger or one pitfall out there might be that you depend too much for too long a period on material that was specifically designed for learners.
Right. Oh yeah.
So it's like, like trying to practice simple strokes, for somebody who tries to learn how to swim like for ages before actually trying to swim for over a certain distance.
So you try to go to the native material as fast as possible. But would you then look up, say, children's stories?
No. I'm always surprised when people suggest that one should start out with children's stories. I think they're some of the most difficult stories.
Oh, really?
Yes. A lot of concepts that are presented there are quite difficult sometimes. And I'm not talking about stories for like children that are 3, 4 years old. I'm talking for children that are between, 8 and 12 or 14. Right. So there are a lot of words that you don't always use in your daily life. And the grammar structure or the grammatical structures that they present there, they're quite complex as well. And it's not always the kind of story that I can relate to as an adult, right? So what I start out with is newspapers and magazines, books on history, and I love biographies. Biographies to me are perfect.
Yeah.
You learn a lot of things about the time period that you've chosen, about the person that you've chosen, and you get all the important grammatical structures. You get all the tenses, because they will make a link to current times as well, and they will have an outlook into the future, whatever. You get direct speech, indirect speech, and if it's a topic that interests you, you will be much more inclined to actually work with that text.
Right.
And
but how do you? So you that was my next question, because when you've gotten the basics down, you can understand, you have the working vocabulary, let's say a few hundred words or something, picking up the, Putin's My Life or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I did, as a matter of fact.
Has he written one?
Yeah. It was somebody else who wrote about Putin and Putin's Russia. That was the title.
But how do you do that? Because to me, that's quite a step going from that basic knowledge of a language all the way up to native level material.
But the thing is that the basic grammatical structures are all covered in the course that I've done before.
Right.
And then I have, I normally have between 800 and 1,000 words after that first step. And then what I do simultaneously with, trying to read authentic material is that I use frequency lists. I know a lot of people don't like them. I love them.
Yeah, I think it's pretty genius. Actually.
Yeah, it's like, those are experts who have chosen between 4,000 and 6,000 words that are the most common words. Yeah. And they put them in context. You always have an example sentence. And I learn maybe, 50, 100 words a day, learning in the sense of reading through these sentences. Right. I don't freak out if I don't remember that word, but I come across it again in a similar context, and then I will understand what it means, what it stands for. I'm not looking up every single word.
Right.
Yeah.
Just as long as you get the context.
Exactly. Right. And I keep learning the words with that frequency list.
Of course. And then when you find yourself understanding it, you just move to the next page.
Exactly.
Well,
and I enjoy reading books in different languages. So maybe at the beginning it might be a good idea to read the book in your native language first, and then read the same book in the target language.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
People talk about Harry Potter all the time.
Yeah.
Or Gary Potter.
Yeah.
I always thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, for example, I bought Obama's biography.
Yeah.
In English, German, and Japanese. I couldn't find it in Chinese. I haven't found it in Russian either. But in French and, Italian, whatever. And it's great. Yeah. First of all, I'm interested in the story. Secondly, there are many, many very useful constructions and a lot of really useful vocabulary, right? Yeah.
That's amazing, and you obviously added a lot of languages. I like the term "added," by the way.
Okay.
I don't remember who coined it, but I think it's really great.
Yeah, maybe Brian.
Yeah, it might have been actually. Yeah, but it's just a great distinction because when you say learn a language, that's so arbitrary. Really.
Yeah.
So when you say added one, that makes it much clearer. Which of the languages you've added have been most? Should say surprising to you, most like when you went into it, you had kind of a preconception of the language and the culture associated with it, and then when you learned it, it was quite different from where you felt. Have you?
Maybe that was Japanese. First of all, it was a language the first language that I started out of the Asian languages that I've studied so far.
Why did you start?
Well, that was a totally random decision.
Oh, well.
Honestly, it's so weird.
That's a decision.
But I don't know, maybe it was just fate or destiny. I remember that day or that night very well because I was totally swamped with work. And I had been working until 3 o'clock in the morning, was totally pissed off, to be honest.
Right.
Because I wanted to go to bed, and then I said, okay, I'm going to finish that translation, then I'm going to do something nice, and I'm just going to surf on the internet. And I came across... I wasn't really familiar with YouTube at that time either. And I came across some videos by a Korean guy who spoke about his passion for languages. Oh, yeah. And then, you get another link and another link. Sure. And then I ended up on the homepage of an American guy who had spent a year in Japan. Oh. Up to that day, I had never dreamed of even trying to study an Asian language. No. And he was describing his experience there in such vivid colors that I went like, oh gosh, I want to do that. Of course, I was still under the impression of having worked way too much. I was exhausted, fed up, whatever. I wanted to show them that I could do something else now. And the next day, I actually ordered some books. I had no idea about Japanese. I hadn't even looked into the books yet. By the time I had already booked my flight to Japan.
Wow.
For a language course. That's commitment. And then I looked into the books and I went like, what's that? Okay, I knew they had some weird writing system, but 3 different forms, and then the grammar and everything. I wanted to give the books back and then I said, no. Okay, I actually put them beneath my bed and I said, okay, if I don't look at them, maybe I'm not interested in them anymore. Oh. And the next day I took them out again, like a real addict. And so I started studying the language. It's been beautiful ever since, but also painful.
Right.
It's a wonderful language. It's a love-hate relationship.
Right.
I've wanted to give up so many times.
Wow.
But before we talked, I was talking to a guy from Malaysia who speaks wonderful Japanese, and we were talking Mandarin as well. And those are the moments when I say, thank you, God. I don't believe in you, but thank you for helping me to stick with Japanese or to Japanese.
You persevered.
Yeah, very much.
But one thing is how do you, you say you were so close to giving up. What was the thing that kept you going if it wasn't a divine intervention?
It was my friends, as a matter of fact. It was my friends, my Japanese friends, that I simply wanted to be able to talk to. And it was a country. By the time I had been there, I was totally in love with many things that are Japanese. I wouldn't want to live there as a Japanese person.
Right.
You are in a somewhat different position as a foreigner, in a more privileged position, I guess.
Right.
I love it. I go there, well, frequently is maybe a bit exaggerated, but I try to go there next year again.
Right.
And I don't know. And of course, to a certain extent, I have to admit, it is pride.
Right.
Because,
unusual.
Yeah, you've invested so much time in it, and then, maybe there are a couple of days where you go like, okay, let's just forget about it. Life is too precious. I'm not going to waste any more time on trying to learn that language. But then, if it's something you really like, you're drawn to it.
Sure.
And it will get you back, no matter what you do. So.
Yeah, and also I guess being a European, knowing an Asian language puts you in maybe as 0.1% of the population or something.
Yeah, especially with Japanese, not so much with Mandarin, I guess.
Right. Oh, yeah, I guess there are more of course, there's 1 million native speakers plus all the learners around the world. But speaking, in Denmark, for instance, there are not that many Chinese or Japanese.
But even at conferences, it's much more common to find Chinese speakers and Chinese interpreters than Japanese ones.
Right. So you have even more special in a way.
Yeah, so in that respect, I guess, yeah. And as I said, I really like the country. I have some really good Japanese friends, and it is a beautiful language. It's just driving me crazy sometimes. It's like with the honorific speech, and I know it's and their kanji. I mean, the characters, the Chinese characters, the different readings that they have. It's as if someone had tried to make sure that no foreign devil would ever be able to speak and write their language.
Right.
And but I still love it.
Right. I find it incredibly interesting, and I almost feel like as a pretty...
So you're studying it too?
No, I'm not at all, actually. I haven't started yet, at least. But I feel like as a kind of a new member to the polyglot community and the language learning or language adding community, I guess we should call it, I almost feel like there's a bit of a pressure almost to learn an Asian language, because that seems to be like the flavor of the...
I do remember that when I saw the first few videos, some people were criticizing some of the some of the polyglots that they were... I guess they even criticized them for being racist or whatever, which is stupid.
Yeah.
Because they said, oh, why don't you speak any Asian language? Why is it only Indo-European languages and whatever? I mean, it's like you choose the language not because other people want you to speak it, but because that's a language that you have an interest in.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's totally true. So maybe, I haven't even looked into the culture or anything, but maybe I'll find that Cantonese is better for me, or Mandarin.
It's wonderful. Yeah. It's and it's always the people that draw you into that language. When I first heard Mandarin without having had any intention of actually studying it, I thought, okay, it doesn't sound that bad, but it's not really a language that I think I could ever, feel attracted to or whatever. And now it's one of my favorite languages.
Yeah, I have the same experience in Russian to a large extent. I mean, I chose to learn it I've heard it a bit, but it always sounded kind of rough and a little edgy. That sounds a little strange coming from a Dane, but there's a difference. And once I started getting into it, I was really surprised at how beautiful it was. Yeah. And I compare it to German a little bit because I was...
Okay, now be careful what you're saying.
I'll do it. But a lot of people say that German is also this kind of brutal commander language. Yeah. And I disagree, because I think the whole combinations with the putting the verbs at the end creates a very nice flow. Mm-hmm. And the complex tenses, something like the hypotheticals, like würde, when you have all these, basically when they change into a vowel, is when I found it really interesting. And the things you can say, that makes it really great. It's not like listening to an opera or a song, that kind of beauty, but it's a kind of like, in German, it's like a functional beauty almost, I feel like.
I mean, of course I'm biased, but I do think German is a very nice language. I think it has been getting a lot of bad reputation for totally different reasons.
Sure, politically.
Yeah, political reasons. And then, when I watch those Hollywood movies where they portray those, even, the Nazis, who undoubtedly were criminals, and, we don't really have to go into detail.
Germans are always the bad guys.
Yeah, but the thing is the way they make them speak. Not even Nazis spoke like that. I mean, I don't know where they got that from. So that is really weird.
Right.
And then again, German is a language with a lot of different dialects and variants, even the standard variants. Sure. Like standard Austrian German is different from standard German or from standard Swiss German. So, I mean, there are minor differences because we all can understand each other most of the time, at least. Yeah. And
I have trouble understanding, say, Swiss German and Bavarian German.
Bavarian German to me is not a problem. Swiss German, yes.
I did the whole shit, change the G. I don't know how to reproduce it, but I had a Swiss roommate, and he tried to speak to me, and there's some of it that I understood, but some of it was also completely lost on me. So
we have similar dialect in Austria, in Vorarlberg, where they actually speak more like the Swiss. And every time I go there, I mean, it's a beautiful part of our country. People are very nice, but I feel like a foreigner.
Switch to English.
Yeah, it's like, honestly, I feel like a foreigner because I can hear that I sound totally different from them. And they realize that right from the beginning, because they use certain expressions that I could try to imitate, but that would be so unnatural to me. And I don't want to put on an act.
Right.
So I talk to them, you know, in standard Austrian German, and they switch to standard Austrian German. But you feel that you are not part of that linguistic community. Right. It's different when I go to Bavaria. I feel much more at home there, linguistically speaking.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. And I guess it's an interesting development anyway, because you have kind of a similar relationship between Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish, but they're defined as distinct languages.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, something like Swiss German could probably be its own.
Well, I mean, I'm not a linguist, but I think so. Yeah.
It probably should. I mean, my friend even told me that they had their own dictionary.
I think they have.
So,
yeah.
I mean, it's funny to see how that happens. Maybe it will change. Maybe Austrian would be a language. I don't know, but who knows?
I don't think so. Well, actually, it is. Well, our standard version is just German.
Sure.
It's just German with a few regional differences, and the dialects actually, except for the ones spoken in Vorarlberg, are German dialects.
Sure.
You know, but the thing is, you have to differentiate between the concept of the German nation and the concept of a German speaking community. I have to be very careful about that because, you know, otherwise I get beaten up by both sides. Leftists and rightists, you know, right wingers, left wingers, whatever.
Right.
It's just my native tongue.
So you should see the language as German kind of without considering the political aspects. Maybe like English in the colonies or something like that. So it's a tool of communication, not like political.
And like here in Berlin, I mean, of course, people notice immediately that I'm Austrian. You know, the minute I open the mouth, sure. Sometimes they think I'm from Bavaria, and you know, the first day I consciously tried not to use too many Austrian terms, and I stopped doing that.
Right.
You know, and like today, I was greeting the guys at the front desk with Grüß Gott instead of Guten Tag. And then I, you know, like, and it's funny because the first day we had, I think it was, no, the second day because it was lunch. Those young guys that, you know, like worked there in the kitchen and what's that, in the dining hall where we have the buffet. And he heard me talk to somebody else in German, but in Austrian German. And when I asked him in German, because I knew he was German too, can I have that, please? Or could you give me that, please? And then he answered with a typically Bavarian and or Austrian term. It was like, which nobody here would use.
That's pretty cool.
And he said, freilich. And I thought, oh, that's nice. And I said, so where are you from? You're not from here. Yeah, I'm from here, but I think the way you say it is kind of cute.
Right.
Okay.
So like naturally or something.
Yeah, so, and that was really nice.
Yeah, I find it really cool. But it's funny that you kind of get picked out as, I mean,
yes,
people don't know where I'm from. If I speak Danish, they'll think, they'll say, are you Irish or something?
Okay.
But
no, normally the funny thing is that sometimes at home in Austria people think that I'm from Germany, but that's not because I speak with a German accent, but I tend to speak standard German, even, you know.
I mean, that's your influence from all the languages.
Exactly,
I mean,
and my work.
It's globalizing you.
Exactly, and then people go like, even in my hometown, you know. That was a few years ago when I was buying a dress for one of my nieces, and then the shop assistant would ask me whether I liked the town, and I said, yeah, very much so. And she said, yeah, and she said, so how long are you going to stay here? I said, well, unless you drive me out, maybe for the rest of my life. And she said, oh yeah, so when have you moved here? When did you move here? And I went like, well, I was raised here. I was not exactly born in that city, but
it's embarrassing.
So when are you going back to Germany? What's the matter with you? I'm not German. It's just because if you don't speak the local dialect, and I don't speak the local dialect for various reasons, and if you speak more or less standard German, in Austria, sometimes people really think that you are either from Vienna or from Germany, and both is equally bad for them.
Yeah, I guess so. One thing that we haven't touched on is when you have all these languages, and some of them you learned a long time ago, what steps do you do to ensure that they stay? I mean, maybe not perfect maintenance, but you know. Do you do anything to keep them?
Yeah, I do a lot of reading. I love reading in all my languages, in German as well, and I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Right.
That's what I still can do, even if I'm really tired after a conference or if I have done a very difficult translation. Listening to a podcast is something that I can always do. And again, I choose topics, and there are lots of fantastic podcasts on the internet that I'm interested in. So I can practice the language and learn something new at the same time.
Right.
I'm interested in history, politics, whatever. So
political.
Yeah,
podcast.
exactly. Yeah. That's what I do. Sometimes I go onto YouTube and I convert the video into an MP3 file, and then I upload it onto my MP3 player, and that's what I do.
Okay, that's simple, and
it works.
I think it's a good thing to do, because you shouldn't fuss about it either.
No,
you will forget things.
Definitely.
That's the rule, and
just don't freak out about it.
Exactly. That's I think that's what I had in mind anyway. And I want to just thank you for taking the time. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.